Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. I'm Renuka and with me is Sahil Sharma, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring to you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Two-day G20 foreign ministers meeting under India's presidency gets underway in New Delhi. Formal meeting to be held on Thursday. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar holds series of bilateral talks with his counterparts from several countries on sidelines of the meeting. India calls upon G20 nations to adopt multilateral action for faster extradition of fugitive economic offenders and recovery of assets. India's flagship conference on geopolitics and geostrategy, Raisina Dialogue, to be inaugurated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi on Thursday. In Greece, at least 36 people killed and more than 80 others injured after two trains collided head-on in north of Athens. And in cricket, Australia lead by 47 runs in first innings at stumps against India on opening day of third test of Boris Gavaskar Trophy. And now the news in detail. The two-day G20 foreign ministers meeting under India's presidency got underway in New Delhi. A gala dinner was hosted for the visiting dignitaries. The formal meeting will be held on Thursday with External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar chairing two sessions. The first session will focus on multilateralism and issues related to food and energy. The second session will focus on new and emerging threats, including counterterrorism and narcotics, global skill mapping, and focus on global talent pools. Briefing media, Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra informed that 40 delegations and 30 international organizations are expected to participate in the meeting at the Rashtrapati Bhavan Cultural Center.
One of them would focus on new and emerging threats. This would include, naturally, the challenges of countering terrorism, counter narcotics. On the more development-oriented considerations, that second session would also focus on global skill mapping, how the G20 can pool together its efforts to do global skill mapping, focus on global talent pool, and also the questions relating to humanitarian assistance and disaster risk reduction.
On the sidelines of the meeting, the External Affairs Minister held a series of bilateral talks with his counterparts from several countries on various bilateral issues and global agendas. Dr. Jaishankar and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov exchanged their views on bilateral cooperation and G20 issues. With his UK counterpart James Cleverly, Dr. Jaishankar reviewed the progress in the India-UK relationship since their last discussion. Sources said the UK Foreign Secretary brought up the BBC tax issue during the meeting. He was firmly told that all entities operating in India must comply fully with relevant laws and regulations. The External Affairs Minister also met his Netherlands, Mexican, Argentinian, South African and Nigerian counterparts.
External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar held a series of bilateral meetings with his counterparts on the sidelines of the G20 Foreign Ministers meet on Wednesday. He had a wide-ranging discussion with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov of Russia this afternoon. They exchanged views on bilateral cooperation and G20 issues. The External Affairs Minister also met Nigerian Foreign Minister Geoffrey Onyeama. Dr. Jaishankar emphasized India's strong commitment to the Global South and the interests of the African Union. They noted recent developments in bilateral cooperation, especially in educational exchanges, and welcomed direct flights between the two countries. He took up the MV Heroic Idun issue and pressed for the early repatriations of crew members. Dr. Jaishankar also met European Union High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell Fontelles. Their conversation focused on the G20 agenda and the Ukraine conflict. They appreciated the steady growth of India-European Union cooperation. External Affairs Minister also met his Mexico counterpart, Marcelo Ebrard. They noted the strong multilateral cooperation and discussed the G20 agenda. The discussion focused on issues related to growth and development. They also exchanged ideas on mobility, sustainability and innovation. Dr. Jaishankar said bilateral ties have progressed significantly in recent years. He welcomed the opening of the Mexican consulate in Mumbai. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar also held a bilateral meeting with UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly in New Delhi. In a tweet, He said they reviewed the progress in the India-UK relationship since the last discussion. Both leaders noted in particular the commencement of the Young Professional Scheme. Sources said the UK Foreign Secretary brought up the BBC tax issue during the meeting. He was firmly told that all entities operating in India must comply fully with relevant laws and regulations.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a news commentary. G20 foreign ministers meet.
The G20 Foreign Ministers meeting is taking place from 1st and 2nd March in New Delhi under India's presidency. Representatives of 40 countries, including non-G20 members, multilateral organizations are invited by India. During the two-day event, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and several dignitaries are scheduled to share their perspective on emerging global challenges and international matters. To discuss on this in detail, we are joined by Ashok Malik, former Policy Advisor, Ministry of External Affairs. Welcome to the program, Mr. Malik.
Thank you.
Mr. Malik, to begin the discussion, I would like to know what significance the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting hold under India's presidency.
G20 was born in 2008 following the global financial crisis as a gathering of the 20 biggest economies on the planet. In that sense, the first G20 presidency under India and the meeting of the G20 foreign ministers in India is the biggest such gathering in India's diplomatic history. There have been moments in the past and more than 20 foreign ministers have been in India, certainly, but foreign ministers of 20 most powerful economies of the world representing such an important share of global GDP to be here at any one given time is certainly a big event. It is perhaps the biggest such gathering in that sense in India.
So, if I'm not wrong, there's one theme in the foreign ministers meeting is that strengthening multilateralism and the need for reforms. I want to understand from you how firmly India could lead the nations to find a possible ground and solution in this.
Look, I don't think you'll find a solution immediately at this meeting itself, but obviously the world has to work towards the multilateral order. The multilateral institutions that have governed us for so many years were born after the Second World War in 1945, the UN system, and got a certain fillip in 1990 after the Cold War with the creation of institutions such as the World Trade Organization and more recently G20 itself. It has been found in recent times that many of these institutions are perhaps past their sell-by date and need to be upgraded. They need to be upgraded in terms of membership. The UN Security Council has 5 permanent members. 4 of them are from the West. 3 of them are from the West. 3 of them are from Europe. Only 1 is from Asia. A country like India doesn't qualify. There is no African representative. So certainly the membership of these agencies and these bodies needs to be upgraded. Second, even thematically, in terms of issues they tackle, these institutions have been found wanting. The UN Security Council is meant to debate and concern itself with issues related to global security. It seems to define security in terms of traditional warfare, invasion, missiles, bombs, guns, and bullets. In 2020, when the COVID crisis hit the entire planet, and there's certainly a huge security risk, an economic, humanitarian, and even political security risk. The UN Security Council did not deem it fit to discuss the COVID crisis because it could not agree that this was a security challenge, and its definition of security was ossified, it was frozen in time. So obviously, both in terms of membership and thematically, the multilateral system needs to be upgraded and reformed. And this is a demand India has been making for some time. Everybody agrees that the multilateral system needs to be reformed and upgraded, but nobody is clear on how this should be done. There's no consensus.
And here I would like to mention what Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra said in the press briefing before the meeting today. He said that given the developing situation of Russia and Ukraine, naturally it will be an important point of discussion during foreign ministers meeting. By focusing on the Russia-Ukraine situation, it will be important to know what they come out with and what understanding is developed. I want to know what's your take on this, Mr. Malik.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which in the words of the Prime Minister is really regrettable because this is certainly not a time for war, has shaken the international system. It is the first land war in Europe in perhaps 70 years, and it has become a proxy war between the US and the West on one side and Russia on the other, even though the actual fighting has been done by Ukrainians and Russians. It has also led to huge economic consequences. It has restricted energy supply chains, whether it is crude oil or whether it is food grains and fertilizers, there is a shortage across the world. Prices have shot up, inflation is very high. Such a situation, countries are looking at the Ukraine crisis from the different vantage positions. Obviously, the countries of the West see this as an invasion of sovereign country by Russia and want to prioritize that aspect of Russia's behavior, while countries of the global South, while not defending Russia's invasion and recognizing that what Russia did was a breach of peace and sovereignty, countries of the global South, including India, would also like an equal focus and equal prioritization on the economic consequences of this war and of the sanctions, including oil prices and more broadly energy prices, as well as food inflation. Yeah, so these are the two sort of different approaches on which there will be debate and discussion at the G20 meeting. Whether it leads to a consensus or not is difficult to say. The hope is always there.
Mr. Malik, you mentioned about the disruption of food supply chain during the Russia-Ukraine war. How do you think G20 nations will address the issue? Plus, how India could play a bigger role in this to develop and establish a cooperation for development among the countries?
I think India would like greater sensitivity vis-a-vis countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America especially, who have been affected by the economic consequences of the war. Some of these countries are already reeling under economic pressures due to the pandemic, due to a debt crisis caused by infrastructure spending, including Chinese infrastructure projects. So on top of that, there has now been problem of food inflation and energy inflation. So India would certainly like a focus on this issue. If you remember, before the G20 meeting, India called a virtual meeting of global South countries to take their message to the G20. India sees itself as a bridge between the global South and the G20. And it would certainly like G20 to contribute to the well-being of the global South nations as well. And that would certainly be India's approach in this meeting.
And Mr. Malik, counter-terrorism steps have become a major concern for the G20 nations. So how are they planning to tackle these new and emerging threats? Plus, what is likely to be discussed about this in the Foreign Ministers meeting?
Terrorism in our part of the world has certainly become even more of a challenge after August 2021, when there was a regime change in Kabul and the Taliban took over. Because Afghanistan has now become a sanctuary for a whole range of bad actors who had earlier been subdued. That apart, in time of such economic flux, terror financing, sources of terror financing, including through the opium trade, the drug trade, new technologies such as cryptocurrency have all got a significant boost. So these are certainly issues on which India would like to focus attention, as it has in the recent past, on the sources that sustain terrorism, both politically or financially, and the hope for a consensual approach from the world to address this.
And as we know that G20 is an intergovernmental forum of world's major developed and developing economies and industry thrive on skilled and talented human resources. So, is there any plan of global skill mapping and talent pool in the Foreign Ministers meeting, Mr. Malik?
Well, I don't think detailed plan can be worked out at this meeting, but there will be a broad conversation, I understand, because as global supply chains are being reordered and, redistributed, there will also be a need for the skill map of the world to be redrawn, because where supply chains go, skills will also be needed. That apart, you are dealing with a strange demography today. Developing countries such as India and other countries in Asia still have a relatively young population, while developed countries in the West especially have a much older population. So there are specific gaps that are emerging in specific countries. I will give you one example. If you look at Japan, which has an aging population, there is a great demand there for healthcare workers, nurses, medical workers, and so on. India has signed a bilateral agreement with Japan to train health workers, nurses, and medical personnel in India, specifically for deployment as workers in this area in Japan. So they are being taught and given courses in a manner that equips them to start working in Japan from the day they land there, and also being taught the Japanese language. So this is just one example. There can be numerous such examples for both India and for other countries, other developing countries across the world. And I think India would like to share these examples and ideas at the G20 meeting.
And with your insightful inputs, we can conclude this session. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on emerging global challenges and international matters. Thank you so much, Mr. Malik, for joining All India Radio.
Thank you.
India has called upon G20 nations to adopt multilateral action for faster extradition of fugitive economic offenders and recovery of assets both on the domestic front and abroad. Chairing the first anti-corruption working group meeting of G20 nations in Gurugram on Wednesday, Minister of State for Personnel, Public Grievances and Pensions Dr. Jitendra Singh highlighted the problems faced by a country when its economic offenders flee from the jurisdiction. He said that the adverse impact of such incidents on a country can be seen in the effective utilization of the resources, the quality of the life of citizens, economic growth and overall governance, and most disproportionately affecting the poor and most marginalized. Dr. Singh underlined that India has already put in place specialized legislation in this regard.
Under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, put in place a specialized legislation a few years back in the form of Fugitive Economic Offenders Act 2018. The term wherein the fugitive economic offender is defined as an individual against whom a warrant of arrest in relation to scheduled offence has been issued by any court in India and who has left the country so as to avoid criminal prosecution, or the offender abroad refuses to return to face the criminal prosecution back home.
The first meeting of the G20 Steering Committee was chaired virtually by UAE Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan. With the participation of numerous ministers and officials of the country, the meeting focused on the UAE's G20 summit priorities for 2023, following the Indian G20 presidency's invitation to participate as a guest country. During the virtual meeting, the minister emphasized the importance of cooperation and coordination among steering committee members to strengthen the UAE's G20 participation and efforts to highlight the country's contributions regionally and internationally. Sheikh Abdullah praised the strong and historical relations that unite the UAE and India and commended efforts by the Indian side to host the G20 summit. The minister noted that the Indian G20 presidency reflects the country's leadership in hosting major global events to promote international cooperation and achieve sustainable development goals worldwide. He stated that through their participation in G20 process, the UAE looks forward to working alongside other countries in efforts to address pressing global challenges. He added that to encourage prosperity and development for all, this is a crucial investment. This is All India Radio giving you the world news.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that well-planned cities are going to be the need of the hour in the fast-paced environment of India in the 21st century. He was sharing his remarks at a post-budget webinar on urban planning, development and sanitation on Wednesday. He said urban planning will determine the fate of the country's cities in Amrit Kal. He emphasized that the development of new cities and the modernization of services in the existing cities are the two main aspects of urban development.
अब 21वीं सदी में जिस तरह भारत तेज गति से विकास कर रहा है, आने वाले समय में अनेकों नए शहर ये भारत की अनिवार्यता होने वाली है। ऐसे में भारत में अर्बन डेवलपमेंट के दो प्रमुख पक्ष हैं, नए शहरों का विकास और पुराने शहरों में पुरानी व्यवस्थाओं का आधुनिकीकरण। इसी विजन को सामने रखते हुए हमारी सरकार ने हर बजट में अर्बन डेवलपमेंट को बहुत महत्व दिया है।
Mr. Modi reiterated that poor planning of cities and lack of proper implementation can create huge challenges in the development journey of India. He asserted the need to work in a very focused way in areas of spatial planning, transport planning and urban infrastructure. The Prime Minister said that transport planning is an important pillar of the development of cities and the mobility of the cities should be uninterrupted. The Prime Minister noted that thousands of tons of municipal waste, including battery waste, electrical waste, automobile waste, tires and waste used for making compost are generated in the country every day. The 8th edition of the Raisina Dialogue will be held from 2nd to 4th of March in New Delhi. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate the dialogue on 2nd of next month. Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, will join the inaugural session as the chief guest. The theme of the 2023 edition of Dialogue is Provocation, Uncertainty, Turbulence, Lighthouse in the Tempest. The Raisina Dialogue 2023 will witness participation of representatives from over 100 countries, including ministers, military commanders, captains of the industry, technology leaders, scholars on strategic affairs, experts from leading think tanks, and youth. This year's edition assumes special significance coming against the backdrop of India's G20 presidency. The Raisina Dialogue is India's flagship conference on geopolitics and geostrategy. It is organized by the Ministry of External Affairs in collaboration with Observer Research Foundation. During the past 8 years, the Raisina Dialogue has consistently grown in stature and profile to establish itself as one of the leading global conferences on international affairs.
India's Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal has said that sustainability and inclusive growth are going to be the defining features of country's growth story in the coming years. He said, India innovate and transition together to make the planet safer and greener. The minister was addressing the Confederation of Indian Industry, India-Europe Business and Sustainability Conclave in New Delhi. Mr. Goyal said that technology, finance and sustainable lifestyles are going to play an important role in ensuring sustainable growth. He pointed out that sustainability and respect for nature came traditionally and naturally to India. He said, India-United Kingdom and India-European Union partnership are two significant elements in the global effort to make the world a better place to live in. He urged all business leaders to focus on sustainability. India and Australia held discussions to take their partnership in the education sector forward in the areas of the school, higher and vocational education. Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan informed that 2 Australian universities will soon establish campuses in the gift city of Gujarat after the high-level meeting with his Australian counterpart, Jason Clare. Remarking on education as the natural mother for all transformation and partnerships, Mr. Pradhan said that both countries are deepening their ties through two-way mobility to fulfill 21st century aspirations. Speaking on the occasion, Mr. Clare expressed confidence that educational MOUs signed between both countries will pave the way for setting up a mechanism for mutual recognition of professionalism.
In Greece, at least 36 people were killed and more than 80 others injured after 2 trains collided head-on in north of Athens on Tuesday night. The accident took place when a passenger train travelling from Athens to the northern city of Thessaloniki crashed head-on with the other freight train, causing the front carriages to burst into flames. The collision was so strong that the first 4 carriages of the passenger train had derailed, while the first 2 carriages were almost completely destroyed. A fire brigade official said the death toll was expected to rise further. He said 66 of those injured were hospitalized and 6 of them in intensive care. Vistara Airlines has resumed daily flights between Mumbai and Colombo. In a statement issued by Bandaranaike Airport on Tuesday, it was announced that the airline would operate between Bandaranaike Airport in Colombo and Chhatrapati Shivaji Airport in Mumbai. The flight took off on Wednesday afternoon from Colombo. The resumption of this route follows a hiatus of nearly 3 years as the airline had to suspend these direct flights due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The flight service will give the passengers looking to travel between the 2 cities more often. Vistara Airlines is operating as a joint venture between Tata Sons and Singapore Airlines since January 2015. Connectivity between the 2 countries has been the focus with the resumption of Jaffna-Chennai flights in December 2022. A passenger ferry service is also to start operations soon between Kanakasandurai in Jaffna and Karikal.
Top diplomats from a dozen foreign missions in China, experts from Food and Agriculture Organization, China and World Food Programme, China and nutrition experts have lauded India's initiative to declare the year 2023 as the International Year of Millets. At a millet roundtable event organized by the Indian Embassy in Beijing on Tuesday, the experts shared the heritage associated with millet grain, especially in Asian and African countries, and their relevance in the current scenario, including their economic, environmental and nutritional benefits. India's ambassador to China, Pradeep Rawat, launched a bilingual recipe book, Let's Millet, during the event and spoke about the significance of these resilient crops and how they are of great value in the face of the climate crisis and food security issues. On the occasion, an original song, Let's Begin with Millets, was performed by I Strings, a fusion band consisting of the Indian diaspora and Friends of India, to a great response from the audience. Taiwan's defense ministry has said that it had spotted 19 J-10 Chinese fighter planes in its air defense zone in the past 24 hours. Taiwan's forces monitored the situation, including sending up its own Air Force planes. Meanwhile, China has said its activities in the area are justified as it seeks to defend its territorial integrity and to warn the United States against colluding with Taiwan. Despite the anger this causes in Taipei, the Taiwanese government has repeatedly offered talks with China, but says the island will defend itself if attacked and that only the Taiwanese people can decide their own future.
In a bid to promote traditional medicines at the global level, Assam government will host the first B2B global conference and expo on traditional medicine under the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, on Thursday in Guwahati. Addressing the media, Union Minister of Ports, Shipping and Waterways and Ayush, Sarbanand Sonowal said more than 150 delegates from 13 member countries will attend the 4-day-long conference and others will participate virtually. In cricket, Australia were 156 for 4 in their first innings against India on day 1 of the third test of the Border Gavaskar Trophy at Indore when stumps were drawn on Wednesday evening. The visitors are leading by 47 runs as India were all out for 109 runs in 33.2 overs in their first innings. Australia spinners trio C. Alex Carey, B. M. Kunheman and B. Lyon ripped through India's fragile batting lineup. The hosts had won the toss and opted to bat first, but the move backfired as the hosts lost 7 wickets in the opening session. India have retained the trophy, winning the first 2 tests of the 4-match series.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world. As reported in the foreign press, the Washington Post writes, Greece train collision kills at least 36, station master arrested. The Financial Times reports, France mounts battle for nuclear energy in Europe. The Straits Times reports, economic recovery to be high on agenda as China's annual parliamentary session meets. The Japan Times report, new US Committee on China warns of existential struggle in first hearing. South China Morning Post says, as COVID-19 wanes, seasonal influenza cases are surging in China. The Globe and Mail reports, Chinese donors who funded Trudeau Foundation wanted statue of Mao in Montreal. The New York Times writes, Wilkin finds receptive leaders in Central Asia where Russia seeks aid.
And now, before we end, let us take a quick look at the headlines once again. 2-day G20 foreign ministers meeting under India's presidency gets underway in New Delhi. Formal meeting to be held on Thursday. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar holds series of bilateral talks with his counterparts from several countries on sidelines of the meeting. India calls upon G20 nations to adopt multilateral action for faster extradition of fugitive economic offenders and recovery of assets. India's flagship conference on geopolitics and geostrategy, Raisina Dialogue, to be inaugurated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi on Thursday. In Greece, at least 36 people killed and more than 80 others injured after 2 trains collided head-on in north of Athens. And in cricket, Australia lead by 47 runs in first innings at stumps against India on opening day of third test of Border Gavaskar Trophy. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnava by artists from Sri Lanka.
Vaishnava Jan to tere kahiye je veer parai jaane re par dukhe upkar kare to ye man abhiman laane re Vaishnava Jan to tere kahiye je veer parai jaane सकल लोकमाय सहुने वंदे निंदा न करे
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.